Dear students of course A101 Introduction to Management, the group of Dr. Iman Karam, welcome. In this lecture, we shall start with our chapter on organizational structure, which is the chapter 10 in your textbook. What is organizational structure? Well, from chapter 1, okay, we have learned that organizing is the process of arranging and structuring work to accomplish an organization's goal. So we arrange work and the people who are going to perform this work in a certain way so that this way would enable them to achieve the organizational goals. And the way according to which people and work are organized in an organization is called the organizational structure. So an organizational structure is the formal arrangement of jobs within an organization. Why? To achieve the organizational goals. Okay? The basic concepts of an organizational design were introduced by Henry Fayol and Max Weber. And why those two scholars? Well, remember in chapter 1a, when we were talking about the general administrative school that was actually considering the entire organization, we talked about Mr. Henry Fayol and we talked about Mr. Max Weber. And while we were talking about Mr. Henry Fayol, we've mentioned the 14 principles that he has introduced. And of these principles, were many principles talking about the hierarchy, talking about order, talking about obedience, the scholar chain, and so on. And all these principles are in fact related to the organizational structure. As for Mr. Max Weber, he also was talking about the importance of having a hierarchy inside the organization, and that we should have authorities based upon the position of the individual inside the organization, not based upon the personalities of those people who occupy those positions. Remember? So this is why we can say that the early or the basic concepts of organizational design and structure were introduced by those two scholars. Why do we need an organizational structure? Well, the purpose is to design efficient and effective organizations in order to allow these organizations to achieve their goals. Because if the people or the employees were working in a chaotic way, we would lose track. We would lose this idea of unity of direction, right? Also, nobody would know to whom he should report, who is supervising or observing his behavior and work and so on. So things would not be as organized as if we had an organizational structure inside the organization. So we need organizational structures in order to design our organizations in an effective and efficient way to help these organizations achieve their goals. Sometimes, after putting an organizational structure and starting to work, sometimes the circumstances and the conditions inside the organization might force it to restructure. And this is why we are going to talk now about organizational restructuring. Whenever we mention the word, the letters re, then this means that we are going to structure from the beginning, or we are going to have a new structure. Okay, so this is why we call it restructuring. Okay. So restructuring indicates that we used to have an old structure and now we are looking forward to changing it. Okay? So why do we restructure? Well, organizational restructuring involves making changes to the organizational setup. These changes have an impact on the flow of authority, responsibility, and information across the organization. So when we change our organizational structure, this would definitely change the scholar chain. It would change the flow of authority inside the organization as well as the flow of responsibility and information. And we usually change when we adopt cooperate strategies that require a kind of change. So let us go back to the chapter on planning. Remember when we have mentioned different strategies for the different levels inside the organization. So we were talking about the cooperate level, so cooperate strategies, and then we were talking about the competitive level, so we were talking about competitive strategies, and finally we were talking also about the functional or departmental level, and this is why we were talking also about functional strategies. And we said that the cooperate strategies are those strategies that are applied to the entire organization. Remember? And we've said that also we have three basic types of cooperate strategies. Number one is the growth strategy. Number two is the stability strategy. And number three is the renewal. Of course, with the growth strategy, we are aiming at increasing the number of products or the number of markets that we are going to have for an organization, right? So in that case, we are aspiring to grow. While when we follow the stability strategy, here we are most probably satisfied with our level of performance, and so we seek to maintain the status quo. So we will not change anything. Whereas in the renewal strategy, we are faced with certain problems, whether on a large scale, so we are going to adopt the turnaround strategy, or we have minor problems in certain parts of the organization, so we would, in that case, adopt the retrenchment strategy. However, both strategies, the growth strategy and the renewal strategy, require some kind of change, whereas the stability strategy doesn't impose any change on the organization as it maintains the status quo. So let us go back to organizational restructuring. When do we restructure? And remember, please, that the structure of an organization includes the entire organization. So, whenever we are going to change our structure, we are going to introduce changes to the entire organization. So, in that case, we are actually responding to strategies that are at the corporate level. And since we've said that it is only the growth strategy and the renewal strategy that require some kind of change, so this means that organizational restructuring is a response to either the growth strategy or the renewal strategy, but never to the stability strategy as it seeks to maintain the status quo. So this is why in point 2 in this slide, the book says that the reason for restructuring varies from diversification, which is one of the examples of a growth strategy, and growth, to minimizing losses and cutting down costs, which are examples of the renewal strategies that aim to respond to certain problems in the performances. And of course, problems might include losses or high costs. So, whenever we seek to minimize losses and to cut down costs, then this is one way of adopting renewal strategies. And this is why I had to explain the relationship or the link between organizational restructuring and the two types of cooperate strategies that would lead to such an organizational restructuring. Also, organizational restructuring may be done because of external factors that exist in the external environment, like merging up with some other companies. Remember the horizontal strategy, horizontal integration strategy? or because of internal factors such as high employee costs. And here we are referring back to the renewal strategies. Okay, so basically, we can sum up and say that we would have organizational restructuring as a response to following either the growth strategies with the different types of growth strategies, whether concentration, vertical integration, horizontal integration, or diversification, or as a result of adopting the renewal strategies with both of its examples, like the retrenchment strategy and the turnaround strategy. This exhibit explains to you why we organize. In the first slide, we said that we organize or design organizational structures in order to make the organizations more efficient and effective to achieve their goals. So, how can we organize? Well, number one, we can organize by dividing work to be done into specific jobs and departments. So, say we had a department for research and development. So, in that case, we will bring all the scientists in our organization and put them in this department. While if we had different accountants, then most probably we would bring them together and put them in a different department from the Department of Research and Development, namely in the Department of Accounting or in the Department of Finance. Okay? If we had maybe engineers inside the organization who can produce our different products, then in that case, we would simply bring them together and put them in the Department of Manufacturing. The second point is assigning tasks and responsibilities associated with individual jobs. Once we have created our different departments and merged the similar jobs together in these departments, then now it comes the time to assign different tasks and responsibilities to the people who are going to do these jobs in these departments. Okay? And number three, coordinate diverse organizational tasks. So here we would also determine how the different employees inside each and every department, or possibly also across department, are going to cooperate together, because no employee in any organization works alone or works in a vacuum. No, he has, or she of course has, a kind of relationship with his colleagues, with his superiors. In case he was a manager, then he would also have a kind of relationship with his subordinates. So in that case, we need to coordinate their tasks with the other people so that we can achieve harmony inside the organization. The fourth point is to cluster jobs into units, which is almost like number one, where we would here bring the similar jobs together and put them in units or departments. And sometimes we might have very big departments that are actually divided into different smaller units. For example, at FEPS, we have maybe the Student Affairs Department, right? شؤون الطلبة. So when you enter, they would ask you, to which level do you belong? The first, the second, the third, or the final level? And according to your level, you would be assigned to a specific unit or to a specific employees who would then respond to your concern or complaint. So in that case, we could. So, of course, it's not officially designed this way, but we could simply say that sometimes we might have very big departments that are also divided into smaller units, for example. Okay? The fifth point is to establish relationships among individuals, groups, and departments. And this is also like coordinating the diverse organizational tasks. Here, you would also determine the kind of relationships. Who is going to report to whom, and who is going to supervise who? And will we build, for example, different teams inside the departments or across the departments? For example, like a committee that has employees coming from different departments and so on. So we would clearly establish relationships among individuals, groups, and departments. Also, we would establish the formal lines of authority. When we know the relationships and when we coordinate the diverse organizational tasks, then we would be able to determine also the formal line of authority. Who's going to give the decisions, who's going to give the orders, and who's going to obey, so that we would have order and discipline inside the organization. Also, we organize by allocating and deploying organizational resources. And this goes back to the famous sentence, put the right person with the right resources in the right place at the right time. So allocate different resources that would enable those people in the different departments and units to work. Because if you do not assign them or give them any kind of resources, how would they work? So, in order to organize, you need to put the people or the employees in the right place, give them the equivalent authorities and responsibilities, and also give them the needed resources. When we design an organizational structure, where first of all we need to know um, a key term which is called organizational chart, which is the visual representation of an organization's structure. So when you go back to the chapter on planning, we were talking about, if you remember, the different strategies at the different levels of management. This exhibit, this figure, is an organizational chart because it represented to you the entire organization with its strategic business units and then with its departments. So, this design or this visual representation is what we call the organizational chart. Okay, and it's basically represents the organizational structure. Okay, so when we decide to design our organizational structure, we actually go through a process that it involves decisions about six key elements. So basically, when we decide to put a specific structure for our organization, we have to answer six main elements. Number one is the work specialization, how it's going to look like, the departmentalization, how according to which criteria are our departments going to be created, and also how our chain of command would look like, so the flow of authority inside the organization. What about the span of control, which is the number of employees that each manager would have to supervise? Centralization versus decentralization, which is the degree to which decisions are centralized at the top of the organization. So, if it is highly concentrated at the top of the organization, so we are talking about a centralized organization. But if it is transferred to the lower levels and the top of this organization is actually not concentrated decision making authorities in his hands. So we are talking about decentralization in that case. And formalization, which means the extent to which we are adopting specific rules and standards in our work. Let us discuss every one of these six elements in more detail. Now, starting with the first element, which is work specialization, Remember when we were talking about it in chapter 1? And we said that Mr. Adam Smith and, of course, Frederick Taylor were among the first scholars to talk about work specialization. So, work specialization is dividing work activities into separate job tasks. And early proponents of work specialization, such as Frederick Taylor and Adam Smith, believed that work specialization could lead to great increases in productivity. And it's true. And this is why we had our time and motion studies. However, be aware that over specialization, and here we mean really over specialization. So you are making your employees focus on only very specific and small tasks. So this is what we mean by over specialization, okay? So over specialization can actually result in human diseconomies or problems such as boredom. If you keep doing the same job every day, and it's not that fun, it's only a specific job and so on, it becomes a routine for you, and after some point it becomes boring for you. Also, it might lead to fatigue or exhaustion. Okay, people start when they start to feel bored about something, they lose their motivation, they lose their energy, and start to feel exhausted. Also, stress, feeling that they do the same thing and so on. This makes them under the pressure of believing that they're not doing anything funny or anything that makes them happy, or that they're not happy at work and so on. So they start to work under this stress. Also, it might lead to poor quality. If you start being programmed to do the same job or task every day and so on, you start to become programmed, and you no longer care about how you do the job. You just do it, because you are programmed to do it. And after some time, you start also to do the work without considering how you do it and the quality with which you do it. So this might lead to poor quality because you just work without putting your concentration in the thing that you do. So you might simply, in the end, produce with poor quality. It also might increase absenteeism. So, when you feel bored, exhausted, stressed in your organization, you would always take any possible chance to not to go to this boring organization according to your own perception. So, you would start to take as many vacations as possible, even sick leaves and so on. So, you become increasingly absent in the organization. And of course, the more you would become absent in the organization, the more or the higher the chance that you would also have a higher turnover, which means that you would at some point of time leave the organization. So, in that case, the organization would suffer from higher turnover where its employees would start to leave it. So, work specialization is important for increasing productivity, of course. However, make sure that you do not over specialize so as to avoid boredom, fatigue, stress, poor quality, increased absenteeism, and higher turnover. Element that we have to consider when we design our organizational structure is departmentalization, which is the basis by which jobs are grouped together. So sometimes we bring similar jobs together based upon the function itself. So we gather all the jobs that are related to finance together in the Department of Finance, or all the jobs that are related to production in the Department of Manufacture, or all those who are related to human resources management in the Department of Human Resources. So we gather jobs here according to the functions performed. Another criterion according to which we can gather jobs together in a department is the product itself. For example, say we are an electronic company, so we can create different departments based upon the different electronic products that we are producing. For example, we would have a department for mobile phones, a department for computers, a department for maybe radios, etc. A third criterion, according to which we can also group jobs together, is according to the territory or the geography that we are considering. Say, for example, we are a touristic agency. So, in that case, we might have departments, for example, covering Arab countries, and a department covering European countries, and a third department covering maybe African countries, etc. A fourth criterion would be the process. So we would here group jobs based upon the process through which we have to go through in order to receive our service or product. For example, when you go to a let me avoid using names, but when you go to buy sandwiches, sometimes you drive in. So you would, in the first window, simply give your order. In the second window, they would confirm your order. In the third window, you would have to pay. And in the fourth window, you would receive your sandwiches. So in that case, here we have grouped jobs according to the process. Or when you go to, for example, renew your personal ID or your driving license, sometimes you enter or you go to a first window in order to receive the formulas that you would have to fill in, and sometimes you go to another window that would check your data and make sure that you have filled in everything, and then you might go to a third window to take your picture, and then a fourth window to receive your ID or your driving license, etc. Right? So accordingly, we have here group jobs based upon the process that we go through in order to receive our product or our service. The final criterion according to which we can also group jobs together is based upon the customers. Sometimes you might enter a place or an organization where you would have specific departments for individuals, another department for maybe cooperations, a third department for maybe groups or governmental organizations, and a fifth would be for maybe private companies, something like this. So here you are grouping the jobs based upon the kind of customers that you are going to serve. And let us take each and every criterion in more detail. Take the 5 common forms of departmentalization in detail, then this exhibit demonstrates how we can create, for example, different departments based upon the functions that we would provide. For example, engineering, accounting, manufacturing, human resources, or purchasing, and so on. Okay? The basic advantages of having such a form of departmentalization, which is based on the functions, is to achieve efficiencies from putting together similar specialities and people with common skills, knowledge, and orientation. So when you put people with the same skills, knowledge, and orientations together in one department, they can exchange their experiences, they can see each other and monitor how they work and so on. So this would definitely increase efficiencies. Second thing is to achieve coordination within functional areas. When people coming from the same educational background or having the same knowledge and skills, they can easily communicate and coordinate their efforts. Also, another advantage is to have in-depth specialization. So when we have the same skills, knowledge, etc., then we can specialize more in what we do because we have the same understanding, the same knowledge about what we are doing, and so on. And thus, we can have this in depth specialization or specialize deeply in the functions that we perform. However, of the disadvantages of such a form of departmentalization is the poor communication across functional areas. Because we share in the same department the same knowledge, skills, and so on, so we become confined to each other, and we don't um, care about what happens in other departments. So in the end, we start having poor communication with other functional areas or across functional areas. Also, focusing too much on what we do inside our department, this makes us have a limited view of the organizational goals because now we are having this specialization of what we do and we don't care about what happens in the rest of the organization. So we become so much concentrated on only what we do instead of the general organizational goals. Again, these advantages are possible and these disadvantages are also possible. So it doesn't say that we would have this all the time, but they are possible, okay? The second form of departmentalization is based upon the geographic region that we are going to serve. So remember when I said that we could have a company serving, for example, Arab countries, Asian countries, African countries, etc. So in that case, we would have the following advantage, which is that we would have more effective and efficient handling of specific regional issues that arise. For example, sometimes when we talk about specific regions, we know, for example, that they need special kinds of immunizations or special kinds of procedures to travel there and so on. So if we create our departments based upon these regions, then each and every department would know exactly the necessary procedures and requirements in order to serve this region. And accordingly, we would be able to achieve the second advantage, which is to serve the needs of unique geographic markets in a better way. Okay. However, of the disadvantages that can take place is duplication of functions. Since we are creating here our departments based upon the geographic regions, for example, Asian countries, African countries, etc. So if we look at how the employees in the different departments are actually working, we find that they would basically, and I here talk about the core tasks, they would basically perform the same things. For example, serving just people from different regions, taking care of the procedures in the different regions, and so on. For example, ticketing and booking flights, etc. It would be basically the same regardless of the region. However, maybe in Schengen countries, we would have additional procedures. In African country, we would have maybe other procedures in Asian countries, a different kind of procedures, and so on. But the core tasks would be basically the same, like booking tickets, booking hotels, etc., for example. Okay, so in that case, we would have people in different departments doing basically the same thing, which would lead to duplication of functions. Also, of the disadvantages that can happen is that people in the different departments can feel isolated. The same thing as it is the case with the functional departmentalization. They become too focused on their department and losing the whole picture of the organization. Okay, so only those who work, for example, to serve the African regions would only be focusing on themselves and wouldn't consider what happens to the others who serve maybe Asian countries, European countries, etc. The departmentalization form that is based upon the product line or the product that we provide, well, this kind of departmentalization allows specialization in particular products. Again, if we have this electronic company and we have one department focusing or concentrating on mobile phones, then they would be very much specialized on mobile phones, and um, they don't necessarily have knowledge about how to assemble radios or something like this, for example. Okay. Also, managers can become experts in their industry. So when you specialize in one product, you would be an expert in that product. A third advantage would be that they would come closer to the customer since they are specialized in these products and are experts in them, so they can easily understand how these products work and how to solve problems with these products. So in case any customer had a certain kind of complaint, they would easily help this customer with this product. However, of the disadvantages, we would have again duplication of functions, because how we assemble mobile phones, radios, maybe different electronic products might be in its essence, in its core, basically the same. So we might have somebody for the electrical parts, somebody for maybe the transmitter of waves, another maybe for data display and so on. So we can see that we might have some of duplication of functions and so on. Okay. Um, Also, of the disadvantages, um, we could have a limited view again of organizational goals, because here each and every department would focus just on the product that it is producing, regardless of what happens in the other departments. Or to the departmentalization form that is based upon the process or the customer flow, for example, as it is the case when you go and renew your ID or your driving license and so on. Well, the main advantage of this type of departmentalization is to have more efficient flow of work activities, because here the employees would focus on a specific kind of procedure in their department. So they would be very much specialized in this procedure, do it with high quality, and so on. However, of the disadvantages of this type is that this kind of departmentalization can only be used with certain types of products. For example, having the sandwiches, okay, like the different chains of sandwich suppliers or providers. Also, we could have, or with the bureaucratic services, for example, such as IDs, driving license, etc. But you cannot follow this when you, for example, want to buy a TV. You cannot go to the first window and ask for a formula, for example, and the second window look for the specification, and then the third window look at the design of the TV, etc. Now, usually you just go and tell them the specifications that you want in your TV, and you just get it. So this kind of departmentalization is not suitable to every type of products. Or services, of course. Also, the last type of departmentalization is based upon the customers, whether, for example, we are talking about individuals, groups, or private versus public organizations, or individuals, just groups, or organizations and cooperations. something like this. Of the advantages of having such a type of departmentalization is that customer needs and problems can be met by specialists because they would be specialized in certain kind of customers and they would know exactly their needs and their requirements. So in that case, they would be able to meet their needs in a better way. However, of the disadvantages that we might have is again duplication of functions because basically the core task would be the same. It's just that the type of customers that you are serving is different. And also, a second disadvantage would be the limited view of organizational goals, because here you would be just focusing on your customers, but you might disregard the entire organizational goals. To sum up, one of the common disadvantages of departmentalizations in general is that if people are so much concentrated on only what they do, they might lose track of the entire organizational goals. However, one of the basic advantages of any kind of departmentalization is that people would become specialists and experts in what they do, because here we gathered or we group similar tasks in one department. Okay, so whatever they're going to do, whatever customers they are going to serve, and so on, they would be specialized in what they do. And by this, we would have finished the first part on organizational structure.